It started on a night no one in Silver Ridge will ever forget. The night a storm split the sky open, and a stranger broke every promise he'd made to himself. Ethan Cole, a quiet single father with the eyes of a man who's seen too much, stopped his old truck on a deserted mountain road when he saw flashing police lights twisted in the rain. Inside the wreck was a young female officer, bleeding out and whispering that backup wasn't coming. That single decision, one he could have ignored, pulled him back into a war he thought he'd left behind. What followed would expose the same cartel that murdered his wife, and force Ethan to choose between the peace he built and the soldier he used to be. By the time the last bullet dropped, Silver Ridge would never be the same again. If you believe courage never retires, if you've ever prayed for someone to come home safe, type Amen in the comments. And before the story begins, tell us, where in the world are you listening from tonight? The rain came down in hard, slanting sheets over the mountains of Silver Ridge, Colorado, the kind of rain that swallowed headlights and erased the line between sky and ground. The winding road snaked along the cliffs, slick with mud and pine needles, while thunder rolled like cannon fire above the ridges. Ethan Cole gripped the steering wheel of his faded blue pickup truck, his knuckles white. He was 40, broad-shouldered, with the stillness of a man who had learned to breathe through chaos. His hair, once dark brown, was now flecked with gray around the temples, cut short out of old habit. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed a jawline etched by years of discipline and loss. His eyes, gray and unflinching, moved constantly, scanning the road, the tree line, the mirrors. On the seat beside him lay a black and tan German shepherd, his coat glistening even in the dim light. Ranger was 6 years old, muscles coiled under wet fur, a scar running across his right ear, a memento from Afghanistan. He was alert even when resting, the kind of animal that seemed to understand silence better than words. Ranger had been with Ethan since their last deployment, and in the 5 years since Ethan left the Navy SEALs, the dog had been his only constant. The dashboard clock blinked 10:47 p.m. He was 2 hours late getting back from a supply run for the general store he worked for. It wasn't much, but hauling boxes and keeping to himself suited him fine. After everything that happened, the cartel ambush that took his wife Rachel, a patrol officer who never came home, quiet was all he could handle. Ethan reached down to scratch Ranger's neck. "Almost home, buddy." The dog's ears twitched, his gaze fixed on the darkness ahead. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it?" Ethan muttered. He eased off the gas. Through the pounding rain, a flicker of red and blue flashed across the bend. Police lights, twisted and wrong, half buried behind a stand of aspens. The smell hit him before he saw it. Gasoline and burning rubber. Ethan's gut tightened. "Stay put," he ordered. But Ranger was already sitting up, muscles tense. The truck rolled to a stop. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out into the storm. The wind knifed through his jacket, and the rain instantly soaked his jeans. Down the embankment, a police cruiser lay on its side, smoke curling from the hood. The beam of his flashlight caught shattered glass, a crumpled door, and a woman slumped over the steering wheel. He slid down the muddy slope, boots sinking deep. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her head stirred slightly. She was young, late 20s maybe, with auburn hair matted with blood and rain. Her skin was pale, almost translucent under the flashing hazard lights. The name tag on her torn uniform read M. Price. "I'm Officer Megan Price," she rasped. Her voice trembled from pain, not fear. "Back up. They're not coming." Ethan crouched beside her. I'm Ethan. Don't try to move. Her vest was shredded, and below it, a deep laceration ran across her abdomen. Blood pulsed sluggishly through the torn fabric. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Weak pulse, uneven breathing. Jesus, he whispered. You've lost a lot of blood. He pulled his phone from his pocket. No signal. The mountains around Silver Ridge were notorious for that. Too remote. Too many blind spots. Ranger barked once from the road, sharp and urgent. The dog's instincts were screaming the same thing Ethan's were. They were running out of time. Gasoline pooled beneath the wreck, shimmering in the rain. The air already carried the metallic tang of fire. Listen to me, Officer Price, he said, his voice steady, calm, the tone of a medic on the battlefield. I'm going to get you out of here, but you have to stay with me. Do you understand? Her eyes fluttered. You're not a doctor. No, he said, pulling off his soaked jacket. Worse. I used to be a SEAL medic. With the knife he kept on his belt, an old combat blade with a worn rubber handle, he sliced through the twisted seatbelt, catching her weight before she fell. She gasped in pain, clutching weakly at his sleeve. I know, he murmured. Hurts like hell. Hang on. He tore a strip from his jacket and pressed it against the wound, applying firm pressure. Then, with practiced precision, he reached into the truck bed and grabbed a metal case he hadn't opened in years. His field kit. Inside were aged but sterile dressings, a tourniquet, and a small vial of clotting powder. He worked fast, hands steady despite the tremor in his jaw. Rain mingled with blood on his fingers, running pink across the dirt. Megan tried to speak, words slurred. They ran me off the road. 2 trucks. Cartel. The word hit him like a knife to the ribs. His throat went dry. You're sure? She nodded weakly. Following a lead. They knew. The ground beneath the cruiser hissed. A spark from the broken wiring snapped through the air. Ranger! Ethan shouted. The dog barked twice in reply. He slipped his arm under Megan's shoulders, his other arm behind her knees, and lifted her. She was lighter than he expected, her body limp but trembling. The rain turned the slope into a slide of mud and roots, but Ranger darted ahead, finding a path through the undergrowth. Halfway up, the cruiser's gas tank ignited. The explosion tore through the trees, lighting the forest like daylight for a split second. The shockwave threw dirt and leaves against Ethan's back. He shielded Megan with his body, feeling the heat wash over them. When the thunder faded, he looked down. The burning wreck glowed below, a pool of orange fire in the black rain. You're insane, Megan whispered faintly against his shoulder. I get that a lot, he replied. At the top of the slope, Ranger whined and circled, anxious. Ethan laid Megan on the ground beside the truck. Her breathing was ragged but steady. He checked the bandage. The bleeding had slowed. You did good, he said quietly. Her eyelids fluttered. You shouldn't have stopped. Yeah, Ethan muttered, staring at the flames below. Story of my life. He climbed into the truck, grabbed a dry blanket from the back seat, and covered her. Then he sat on the wet asphalt beside Ranger, running a hand through the dog's fur. The storm hadn't let up, but for the first time in years, Ethan's mind was eerily clear. 5 years of silence. 5 years of pretending he'd left the war behind. But tonight, under the cold rain of Silver Ridge, Surrounded by smoke and sirens in the distance, he realized the truth. The war had never left him. It had just been waiting for him to answer. Ranger rested his head on Ethan's knee, eyes reflecting the firelight. Ethan whispered, almost to himself, "Looks like we're back in it, boy." The dog didn't move, only thumped his tail once against the ground, a quiet acknowledgement that the soldier in both of them had just woken up again. The smell of antiseptic and rain still lingered in the corridors of Silver Ridge County Hospital. The storm had passed hours ago, leaving the town washed clean but heavy with the scent of pine and diesel from rescue vehicles parked outside. Inside room 207, fluorescent lights hummed above the still body of Officer Megan Price. Her auburn hair was matted to her forehead, the right side of her face marked by a deep bruise where the airbag had struck. She was tall, athletic, the kind of woman who had spent years in a police gym yet carried herself with quiet restraint. A deep-stitched wound ran across her abdomen, covered neatly by gauze. The stitches, too straight, too perfect, caught the attending doctor's attention immediately. Dr. Patel, a thin man with rimmed glasses and permanent worry lines, leaned closer. "Whoever did this," he said softly to the nurse beside him, "wasn't an amateur. This is combat medicine. Clean, fast, efficient." The nurse frowned. "You think a paramedic found her out there?" Patel shook his head. "No paramedic works like this. This was done under fire, by someone who's been there." Outside the room, Police Chief Roy Bennett stood with his arms crossed, watching through the glass. Bennett was in his late 50s, broad-chested with a permanent tan from decades in the Colorado sun. His silver hair was cut military short, and a thick mustache framed a mouth that rarely smiled. People in Silver Ridge said he was born with his jaw clenched, and that wasn't far from the truth. He'd been a cop for 30 years, long enough to know what cartel brutality looked like. But this precision, this intervention, was something else entirely. When Megan had been found, she was barely alive. Yet by the time paramedics arrived, the bleeding had slowed. Her vitals were stable, and a field tourniquet had been tied so well that even the hospital trauma staff praised it. Whoever saved her had disappeared before anyone could ask a question. Bennett turned to his deputy, a young officer named Tom Weaver, lanky, eager, still new enough to shine his badge every morning. "Find me the man who pulled her out," Bennett ordered. "The truck she came in, plate number, make, color, whatever. I want it now." "Yes, sir," Weaver replied, already flipping open his notepad. By noon, the story spread across the small mountain town. A mysterious man with a German shepherd had rescued a dying cop in the storm, then vanished into the night. 2 miles away, at the edge of town, Ethan Cole was sitting at the corner booth of Grace's Diner, the only place open before sunrise, and the only one that didn't ask questions. The diner smelled of coffee, bacon grease, and old country songs from the jukebox that hadn't worked properly in years. Ethan sat with his usual black coffee, untouched, his damp jacket hanging on the back of the chair. Ranger, the German shepherd, lay beneath the table, his head on his paws, occasionally lifting his ears when the door opened. Grace Miller, the owner, moved behind the counter, with the ease of someone who'd been doing this her whole life. She was in her mid-50s, with warm brown eyes and silver streaks in her hair that she didn't bother to dye. The lines on her face came from smiling more than frowning. But tonight, they carried a quiet grief. She had lost her only son, a Marine, 10 years ago in Afghanistan. And though she never talked about it, the flag folded in a wooden frame above the counter said enough. Grace poured him a fresh cup of coffee. You look like hell, Ethan. He gave a half smile. Feel worse. She slid the mug toward him and leaned her elbows on the counter. Storm kept you up? Something like that. He glanced out the window. The rain had slowed to a mist. Heard sirens most of the night. Grace studied him, noticing the mud on his boots, the faint smell of smoke clinging to his jacket. You were out there, weren't you? Ethan didn't answer. Ranger lifted his head, amber eyes watching her. Grace's voice softened. You did something, didn't you? He met her gaze for a second before looking away. Someone needed help. Grace sighed, shaking her head. That's always been your curse, Ethan. You can't help yourself. She meant it kindly. After all, she'd watched him drift into town 5 years ago. Quiet, polite, always paying cash. He worked odd jobs, kept to himself, never talked about his past. But everyone knew the way he scanned a room, the way his posture never fully relaxed, and the way that dog never left his side. Outside, the diner's doorbell jingled. 2 uniformed officers stepped in, rain still dripping from their coats. One of them, Officer Weaver, looked young enough to still call Bennett Sir, with both respect and fear. Morning, Grace, he said, tipping his hat. Sorry to bother you. Grace crossed her arms. You're not bothering me, Tom. Coffee? Not today, ma'am. He looked toward Ethan's table, recognizing the man from a truck they'd traced through town security footage. Mr. Cole? Ethan didn't flinch. That's me. I'm Officer Weaver, Silver Ridge PD. The chief would like a word about last night. Grace frowned. He didn't do anything wrong. Weaver nodded quickly. No one's saying he did. We just need to confirm some details. Officer Price, the one who crashed, she's alive thanks to whoever pulled her out. Ethan's hand paused halfway to his coffee cup. She's alive? Barely. But yeah, Weaver said. Doctors say whoever treated her saved her life. Grace shot Ethan a look, half pride, half worry. You hear that? Ethan's voice dropped. Yeah, I hear it. Weaver hesitated, glancing at Ranger. That your dog? Yeah, Ethan said simply. He doesn't bite unless you deserve it. The officer gave a nervous laugh and stepped back. Chief Bennett would like to thank you personally. He's at the station. Ethan nodded once. Tell him maybe tomorrow. Weaver blinked. Sir? Tomorrow, Ethan repeated, tossing a few bills on the counter. He stood, tall and solid, the kind of man whose presence filled a room even when he said nothing. Ranger rose immediately, tail low, eyes alert. Grace watched them go, the bell chiming behind them. Outside, the clouds had broken just enough for a sliver of sun to hit the wet pavement. Weaver turned back to Grace. Is he always like that? She smiled sadly. Like what? Like he's carrying the whole damn world on his shoulders. Grace's gaze lingered on the door. Because he is. She looked at the photo of her son above the counter, then whispered to herself, some wars never end. They just move home. And somewhere outside, as Ethan climbed into his truck with Ranger beside him, the whispers of that same war were already stirring. Old ghosts knocking again, waiting to be answered. Morning light crept over Silver Ridge, slicing through the thin fog that still clung to the mountains. The town was quiet except for the distant hum of trucks along Highway 12 and the occasional bark of a dog. Inside the police station, however, tension hung in the air like static. Detective Carla Ruiz stood over a corkboard filled with photos, maps, and red strings connecting faces that didn't want to be connected. She was in her late 30s, with olive skin, sharp cheekbones, and dark eyes that saw more than people were comfortable with. Her black hair was tied back in a tight bun, and she dressed in a dark blazer that contrasted against her badge clipped neatly to her belt. She had the aura of someone who'd seen enough lies to stop believing in coincidences. Carla had come to Silver Ridge 6 months earlier after transferring from Phoenix PD. Her file was spotless, her clearance rate enviable, but it was the scar along her right forearm that told the real story. 3 years ago, a sting operation went wrong. A cartel informant she was protecting was executed in front of her. Since then, she worked cases like a woman paying off a debt. Relentless, sleepless, driven by ghosts. Now, those ghosts had found their way here. She tapped the photo of Megan Price, still recovering in the hospital, her face bruised but alive. On the board beside her was another photo. Rachel Cole, Ethan's late wife. 2 women, 2 badges, 5 years apart, both targeted by the same cartel name that appeared again and again in DEA bulletins. Los Nueve Caminos. Chief Roy Bennett entered the office carrying 2 coffees. "You've been at this all night, Ruiz. Take a break before your brain short-circuits." Carla barely looked up. "Chief, you ever believe in patterns?" "Only when they're drawn in blood," he said, setting a cup beside her. She pointed to the board. Price was investigating narcotics trafficking across 3 counties. Look at the dates on her reports. All filed off record. No departmental clearance. She was onto something she didn't trust anyone else with. Bennett frowned. "You're saying she went rogue?" "I'm saying she got too close," Carla replied. "And whoever ran her off that road didn't just want her dead. They wanted her silent." Bennett's jaw tightened. "This is the same group that hit Rachel Cole's unit 5 years ago, isn't it?" "Exactly. Different faces, same tactics. Which means they're back, and they're in our backyard." The chief took a long breath. "And the man who saved her, Ethan Cole, happens to be the widower of their last victim. Hell of a coincidence." Carla met his eyes. "With all due respect, sir, I don't believe in coincidences either." That afternoon, Ethan Cole parked his pickup in front of his modest cabin at the edge of town. The place was simple. A small porch, wood stacked by the door, the faint smell of coffee and dog hair in the air. Ranger, the 6-year-old German shepherd, patrolled the yard like it was foreign territory, his nose twitching at every unfamiliar scent. Inside, laughter drifted from the kitchen. Lily, Ethan's 11-year-old daughter, was finishing her homework at the table, legs swinging as she hummed a tune from the radio. She had her mother's hazel eyes and his steady concentration. Her hair, chestnut brown, was pulled into a messy ponytail that refused to stay still. "Hey, kiddo," Ethan said, setting his keys on the counter. "Math treating you all right?" "Only when you don't check it," she replied, grinning. He smiled faintly and ruffled her hair. For a brief moment, the house felt normal, warm, ordinary, something resembling peace. Then Ranger barked sharply, a deep warning sound that echoed through the walls. Ethan's instincts kicked in. He stepped to the window, parting the curtain. A black SUV sat at the end of the gravel road, engine idling. Its tinted windows made it impossible to see inside. He exhaled slowly. "Lily, grab your backpack." "Why?" she asked, sensing the change in his tone. "Just do it." He watched the SUV for a few seconds longer before it rolled forward, turning back toward the highway. Ranger's fur bristled until the vehicle disappeared from view. Ethan crouched beside the dog, patting his flank. Good boy. You saw it too. His pulse steadied, but the realization hit him like a cold wave. Someone had found them. Again. Later that evening, a knock echoed through the diner. Grace Miller looked up from wiping down tables. Her hands smelled faintly of coffee and lemon soap. When she opened the door, she found Chief Bennett standing there, his uniform damp from the mountain rain. "Evening, Grace," he said. "He here?" She sighed, nodding toward the back booth. "Same coffee, same corner." Ethan looked up when Bennett approached. The chief slid into the opposite seat, placing his hat on the table. "I'm not here to arrest you," Bennett began. "In fact, I'm here to ask for your help." Ethan leaned back, skeptical. "You've got plenty of uniforms for that." "Not like you," Bennett said. Detective Ruiz connected the dots. Megan Price was investigating Los Nueve Caminos, the same cartel that killed your wife. They're running product through the mountain routes. We're outgunned and outtrained. Ethan's jaw clenched. "So you want me to go after them?" "I want you to teach my people how to survive them," Bennett corrected. "Combat first aid, field tactics, the kind of training the military takes for granted. You wouldn't be in the field. You'd be a consultant." Ethan shook his head. "I've got a kid. I'm not going back to that life." "Ethan," Bennett said quietly, "you never left it. You're just pretending it's not knocking at your door." Ethan said nothing. The chief stood, adjusting his belt. "Think about it. Because if this cartel's watching our officers, they're watching anyone tied to them, including the man who ruined their plans last week." When the door shut, Grace came over, pouring him another cup without asking. "You gonna tell me what that was about?" Ethan stared into the coffee, seeing the reflection of a man he no longer recognized. "He wants me to train cops. Says it's safer than fighting." Grace placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Sometimes courage isn't about charging in, Ethan. Sometimes it's about standing up when you swore you'd never do it again." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You sound like someone who's lost too." Grace smiled sadly. "Honey, everyone here's lost something. The question is whether you let it keep you lost." Outside, Ranger waited by the truck, watching the road. The night air was heavy with rain and pine, and somewhere far off, an engine idled again in the dark. Ethan knew then what Grace meant. Some wars didn't end. They just came home. The sun had barely risen over Silver Ridge, and the mountain town looked deceptively peaceful, golden light stretching over pine-covered hills, the smell of wet earth still clinging to the air. But inside the Silver Ridge Police Department's training yard, the calm was broken by shouted commands and the rhythmic slap of boots on concrete. 2 weeks had passed since Ethan Cole agreed to train the department. In that time, he'd transformed a group of small-town officers into something resembling a rapid response unit. Gone were the lazy habits and the half-buttoned uniforms. Now they moved with precision, disciplined, alert, breathing in sync. Ethan had drilled them relentlessly in field medicine, tactical movement, and how to stay alive when plans went to hell. He stood in front of them now, tall and broad, the sleeves of his gray t-shirt rolled up, arms marked by faint scars from an older life. His voice, steady and calm, cut through the air. "Every move you make out there," he said, "decides whether you go home or someone else doesn't. You train muscle memory so your brain doesn't have to think when bullets start flying." At his feet, Ranger, the 6-year-old German shepherd, lay in a perfect sphinx position, head high, amber eyes sharp. He was more than a mascot. He was Ethan's second shadow. The dog followed every command with the same precision as any SEAL partner would. Megan Price, still recovering from her injuries, sat nearby on a folding chair. Her skin had regained some color, though a faint pallor lingered beneath her freckles. She wore plain tactical pants and a windbreaker over her bandaged midsection. The pain still came in flashes, but her spirit was unbroken. Watching Ethan teach, she saw the quiet authority of a man who had led others through chaos. Not shouting, not demanding, just guiding with absolute certainty. When Ethan caught her looking, he gave a small nod. "You feel up for joining the next drill?" Megan smirked faintly. "If you need someone to shoot straighter than these guys, sure." Laughter rippled through the squad. Even Chief Roy Bennett, who stood in the doorway observing with his arms crossed, cracked a rare smile. "You're doing good work, Cole," Bennett said once the drill ended. "Morale's higher than I've seen in years." Ethan handed Ranger a treat and shrugged. "They're learning. That's what matters." Bennett nodded, then lowered his voice. "Ruiz got a lead. There's chatter about a warehouse on the east side of town, Old Mill District. DEA flagged a shipment moving through there. It might be our break." Ethan frowned. "The cartel?" "That's the rumor," Bennett confirmed. "We move at dawn. You'll be in the command vehicle. I want your eyes on the feeds." Ethan hesitated. "I'm not leading a raid, Chief. I consult. That was the deal." "And you'll stick to it," Bennett said. "But I need your instincts. You've seen how these people operate." Ethan glanced down at Ranger. The dog's ears had perked up, sensing his unease. "All right, I'll watch. But if something smells wrong, we pull back. No heroics." "Agreed." The next morning, fog rolled low over the industrial outskirts of Silver Ridge. The old lumber warehouse loomed at the edge of a field, its rusted corrugated walls streaked with rain and soot. The SWAT-style team, 8 officers strong, moved quietly through the mist, weapons raised, radios crackling in their earpieces. Inside a mobile command van parked half a mile away, Ethan sat hunched over a bank of monitors showing drone and body cam feeds. The glow from the screens lit the sharp lines of his face, the square jaw, the tired eyes that had seen too much. Detective Carla Ruiz stood beside him, arms folded, her gaze fixed on the same monitors. "Looks clean," she said. "Too clean." Ethan grunted. "That's what worries me." Ruiz's phone buzzed. She answered briefly, then frowned. "Intel says 2 trucks arrived here last night, but they're gone now. No heat signatures inside except one." "One?" Ethan repeated. "That's wrong. Cartel doesn't leave cargo unguarded." Ranger, sitting by the van door, suddenly stiffened. His nose twitched, ears standing straight. A low growl built in his throat. Deep, primal, the kind that always meant danger. Ethan looked down. "Easy, boy. What do you smell?" The dog's growl deepened, directed not at the monitors, but at the warehouse itself. Something out there. Ethan's instincts flared alive. His hands tightened on the radio. "Team 1, hold position," he ordered. "Do not breach. Repeat, hold." Bennett's voice came through the comms, steady but tense. "Cole, what's going on?" "Something's off," Ethan replied. "Too quiet. No movement, no guards. That's not security. That's bait." Through the drone feed, a faint shimmer caught his attention, a metallic glint under the dirt near the back door. He zoomed in. The shape was unmistakable. A pressure switch. "Bomb," he breathed. "They wired the exit." Before anyone could react, movement flickered on another camera. a figure stepping out from behind a stack of crates inside the warehouse. The man was tall, lean, wearing black tactical gear, a smirk visible even through the grainy image. "That's Luis Vargas," Ruiz said, her tone hard. "Cartel lieutenant. He's holding a detonator." Ethan's voice sharpened. "Everyone freeze! Nobody moves!" But inside the warehouse, Megan, back on duty against doctor's orders, had already taken cover behind a forklift. Her breathing was ragged, but her aim steady. Over the radio, Ethan spoke quickly, low and controlled. "Megan, listen to me. You've got a wire running from the door to a detonator in Vargas's hand. If he lets go, it blows the whole place." "I see it," she whispered. "Options?" Ethan's pulse pounded. "You've got one. Take the shot. Clean and high. Don't hit the switch." Outside, Ranger barked once, sharp and commanding, like an order. It was the same bark he used in combat, the one that always came before chaos. Inside, Vargas raised the detonator. "Adios, cops," he hissed. Before he could press it, a blur of motion burst through the set entrance. Ranger, charging full speed, teeth bared. The dog slammed into Vargas, clamping down on his forearm. The detonator dropped, skittering across the floor. Ethan's voice roared through the radio. "Now!" Megan exhaled, aimed, and fired once. Vargas dropped. Silence followed. Then the sound of officers shouting, "Clear!" filled the comms. Ethan sprinted from the van, Ruiz behind him. When he entered the warehouse, the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with sweat and diesel. Ranger sat beside Vargas's body, panting but uninjured, blood smeared on his fur. Megan leaned against a crate, pale but standing. Ethan crouched beside her. "You all right?" She nodded weakly. "Next time, maybe you leave the dog on the leash." He smirked. "You know him. Doesn't listen to orders he doesn't like." Bennett stepped in, eyes scanning the scene. "0 casualties," he said, almost in disbelief. "Not a single officer down." Ethan looked at the team. Bruised, muddy, alive. That's what training's for. Outside, dawn finally broke through the fog, casting pale light over the town. The war wasn't over, but for the first time in years, Silver Ridge had won a battle. And for Ethan, watching Ranger wag his tail beside him, it felt like something he hadn't known in a long time. Hope. Spring had come to Silver Ridge, the kind that didn't just melt snow. It thawed people. The mountains stood green again, the rivers alive, and the scars of winter hidden beneath a blanket of wildflowers. For the first time in years, the town breathed easy. The cartel network that had haunted the county for half a decade was gone. Arrests had rolled in like dominoes, dozens of suspects, warehouses raided, money trails severed. The name Los Nueve Caminos was fading into a footnote in law enforcement reports. But for Ethan Cole, the end of that war wasn't a celebration. It was a silence he didn't quite know how to live in. He sat on the porch of his small cabin, boots crossed, a mug of coffee in hand. Ranger, his German shepherd, lay stretched across the wooden planks beside him, muzzle flecked with gray now, eyes half closed but alert as ever. The old dog had earned his peace, though Ethan doubted either of them would ever stop scanning the tree line. Some instincts never retire. Down the road, an old Ford pickup pulled up and parked beside the fence. Megan Price stepped out, her stride confident, but slowed by the faint stiffness in her side. A reminder of the scar Ethan had helped her survive. Her hair, auburn and wavy, was tied back loosely, and she wore civilian clothes now, dark jeans, a brown leather jacket, and her badge clipped to her belt. The title beneath it was new: Detective. "You weren't easy to find," she said with a faint smile as she climbed the steps. "I wasn't hiding," Ethan replied. "Just keeping the noise low." "Same thing?" She handed him a thin folder, its edges worn. "You might want to see this. It's the final report." He opened it slowly. Inside were photos, statements, and one page stamped in red. Case closed. Rachel's killers, 3 men tied to the cartel's logistics ring, had been arrested after DNA from a seized van matched evidence from the ambush 5 years earlier. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. His fingers brushed over his wife's name, printed in black and white, and he felt something loosen in his chest. Not anger, not even grief, just release. "You okay?" Megan asked quietly. "Yeah," he said, closing the folder. "It doesn't bring her back, but it means she didn't die for nothing." Megan nodded. "I thought you'd say that." They sat for a while, the wind whistling through the pines. When she finally stood to leave, Ranger rose, tail wagging slightly. "He remembers you," Ethan said. "I'd be offended if he didn't." She scratched behind the dog's ear, smiling. "You know, we're starting a county task force next month. Joint operation with the DEA. They asked if I knew anyone who could teach tactical medicine." Ethan chuckled softly. "You just don't quit, do you?" "Neither do you," she said, glancing around the porch. "But maybe you've finally found a better battlefield." He looked out at the valley below, where the town stretched like a quiet promise. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe." Megan turned to go, but paused halfway down the steps. "You ever think about coming back? Even part-time?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I think about a lot of things. Doesn't mean I do them." She nodded, understanding, and walked back to her truck. The engine rumbled to life, fading into the distance. Ethan watched until she disappeared down the dirt road, leaving only the echo of tires against gravel. A week later, the wooden sign went up over a small converted barn at the edge of town. Cole and Ranger First Response Training, because the first minute matters. The inside was simple but solid. Rows of chairs, CPR dummies, bandages neatly arranged on tables. It smelled faintly of sawdust and coffee. Ethan had built most of it himself, with a little help from the townsfolk and Grace Miller, the diner owner who refused to let him skip breakfast for 3 straight weeks. Grace had expanded her business since the raid, turning the back of her diner into a responders cafe, a place where cops, medics, and firefighters could eat free. Her hair had grown a little grayer, but her spirit hadn't dimmed. "You sure about this?" she asked as she carried in a box of coffee urns. Ethan smiled. "You've been asking me that every day. And I'll keep asking till you stop looking like a man waiting for permission to breathe," she replied. Her eyes softened. "Rachel would have been proud." He nodded, throat tightening. "I hope so." The first class filled the room, a mix of civilians, teachers, construction workers, even a teenage boy with an EMT patch on his backpack. At the back, Lily, now 12, sat cross-legged with a notebook, trying to hide her excitement behind a serious face. She had grown taller, but her smile was still the same, the one that cracked Ethan's defenses every time. He stood at the front beside a whiteboard, Ranger sitting obediently at his heel. "All right," he began, voice calm but carrying weight. "Today isn't about being heroes. It's about doing something when everyone else freezes. Sometimes the person who saves a life isn't a soldier or a cop. It's the one who remembers what to do in the first 60 seconds. He demonstrated chest compressions, wound packing, tourniquet placement. The crowd watched, captivated. Lily's eyes shone with quiet pride as he spoke, her pencil scratching notes furiously. Grace slipped in halfway through with trays of coffee and pastries, whispering to the volunteers in the back. After class ended, people stayed to talk, to thank him, to shake his hand. One young woman, Emily Torres, a 20-year-old nursing student with short black hair and freckles dusted across her nose, told him, "My brother's a firefighter. He always says the hardest thing is watching someone die because you don't know what to do. I'm glad you're teaching us." Ethan smiled, genuinely. "Then make sure you pass it on." As the last of the students filed out, Lily ran up and hugged him. "You were awesome, Dad." "Thanks, kiddo," he said, brushing her hair back. "You learned something?" "Yeah," she said with a grin. "That you're kind of a big deal." He laughed softly. "Don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation for being boring." That night, Ethan stood outside the barn, the sign creaking softly in the mountain breeze. Ranger sat beside him, gaze fixed on the darkening sky. The sunset painted the clouds orange and gold before fading into deep blue. From somewhere down the valley came the faint hum of an engine, a lone vehicle moving along the old logging road. Ranger's ears perked. Ethan frowned, watching the distant headlights weave through the trees. Maybe it was just a local. Maybe not. He rested a hand on Ranger's back. "We're not done yet, are we, boy?" The dog didn't move, muscles tense beneath his fur. The headlights paused for a moment at the curve of the road, then blinked out, swallowed by the dark. Ethan stood there for a long time, listening to the wind. The peace he'd built around himself suddenly felt fragile, like glass waiting for the next crack. He looked down at Ranger. "Guess we keep the lights on tonight." Ranger's tail flicked once, a silent agreement. Inside the barn, the whiteboard still glowed faintly under the porch light. Across the top, Ethan had written one sentence in black marker, "Never leave a fallen." And as the night closed in around the hills of Silver Ridge, it was unclear whether that sentence was a memory, a warning, or a promise waiting to be tested again.